Chapter 12 December 1959, Beijing. Lan Ying picked up yet another piece of steamed fish and put it in Igor's bowl. "Have another piece. You've eaten so little. I hope you like my cooking." She could barely contain her enthusiasm that Zoe had finally brought a man home. "It's delicious, but I'm stuffed, really," Igor replied, leaning back in his chair to rub his stomach. "Zhu Yi told me your father was a famous nuclear scientist," said Lan Ying, "and that you were awarded a medal for nuclear research." Igor glanced at Zoe, nodded, and said with obvious pride, "Yes, my father was a great influence for me. After my graduation, I applied to the laboratory where he had worked, so I could continue his research." He paused for a few seconds, debating, and then continued. "The success of the Soviet hydrogen bomb in 1953 was a collaborative work. I just did what any loyal scientist would do. Explore the unknown world." "You're very modest. I like that." Lan Ying was impressed, Zoe could tell. "But because of your work, the Soviets produced the bomb just 1 year after the Americans did. That has changed the world. Now the socialist bomb is powerful enough to fight against the capitalist bomb." Zoe's father commented. Professor Meng took a sip of the vodka Igor had brought as a gift from the Friendship Store, a specialty retailer for the foreigners in China. Thus far in the conversation, he had hardly said a word, and his silence made Igor nervous. Now that he knew that the old man liked him, Igor felt himself relax a little. He dipped his head respectfully, feeling just a twinge of guilt about deceiving these kind people. He needed them to make his plan work. "Zhu Yi, you should have written to tell us you had a boyfriend, so we could have greeted him properly," Lan Ying scolded, but the disappointment in her words couldn't hide her pleasure at Zoe finally bringing a prospective son-in-law home. "Sorry, Mama." Zoe scrunched up her face in embarrassment. Working at a top-secret facility, she couldn't tell her parents anything about her true circumstances. And her parents knew that. She quickly changed the subject, handing a shopping bag to Igor. "I bought you a new scarf, since you gave yours away." She then turned to her parents and said, "On the way home, we were horrified to see people are starving. No food, no clothes. What's going on? Why don't they get help from the government? How can the Great Leap Forward be making China go backward instead?" "Don't say that," Lan Ying interrupted in a serious tone, shooting a quick glance at her husband before returning to her usual soft voice. "We have to trust our party. The natural disaster will be over soon, as will the famine. Everything will be good." Professor Meng sat at the table quietly. He was in trouble already for questioning the propaganda about unrealistic grain output from the rice fields. His ancestor used to be a landlord in possession of a vast rice paddock in Sichuan province, where he spent much of his happy childhood. It was impossible to harvest 10 tons of grain per mu, according to his knowledge, even in a good year. But now he sealed his mouth shut and tried not to worry his wife. It was an awkward silence. Nobody seemed to know how to lead the conversation. Igor interrupted the quiet by pulling the scarf out and wrapping it around his neck. "It's so soft, and I like the color. Thank you." He looked at Zoe and reached over to squeeze her hand. Lan Ying was pleased to see the affection between them and couldn't suppress her enthusiasm. "So, what's your plan?" Igor flinched. How could she know about his plan to escape to Britain? He almost laughed out loud when he realized she meant marriage plans. He took a breath and smiled at Zoe. "Step 1. Here we go." Lifting Zoe's hand, he kissed it gently. "We haven't made any specific plans yet. Right now, I just want to spend as much time as possible with Zhu Yi. We've been so isolated and working so hard. I'd really just like to have some fun with her for a change. Maybe take her dancing for Christmas and New Year." Zoe stared at the table, uncomfortable that her mother was so forward, but said nothing. Lanyon clapped her hands with delight. "Why don't you come to the Christmas party at the embassy next weekend?" It would be the perfect opportunity to show off her talented and important daughter to her colleagues, especially now that Zoe had a prospective husband. "That would be great," Igor nodded, surprised at how easily his scheme was falling into place. Escape plan step 1. Check, he thought with a smile. The Christmas party at the British Embassy promised to be the year's grandest gathering in Beijing high society. Lanying scurried around, introducing the guests and making sure no one important was left out. Occasionally, she took a short break to make sure Zoe and Igor were having a good time, naming the distinguished people she knew with obvious pride. Igor's ears pricked up when she pointed out Lord William, the chargé d'affaires at the British Embassy. The presence of several Russian diplomats at the party made him nervous. Were they KGB, or just government officials? He steered Zoe to the furthest corner of the room, not wanting to be noticed, or worse, recognized by those Russians. He managed to keep her entertained while keeping track of Lord William, watching and waiting for the opportunity to execute his plan. When Lord William abruptly left a cluster of guests and strode toward the door, Igor caught his breath. A hush descended over the crowd, and Igor felt his fists clench in panic. He almost gasped with relief as Lord William greeted a new arrival and led an especially important-looking guest to the stage. The next second, his stomach dropped through the floor as Lord William announced, "Please welcome Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai." The room responded with polite applause. Premier Zhou gave a short speech, then mingled with the crowd, smiling and shaking hands. He wasn't tall, but his charisma drew people to him. For a while, Lord William accompanied the Premier around the room, basking in the attention from the international community. Half in a daze, Igor led Zoe to the dance floor. After several songs, Zoe looked up at him shyly. "Igor, when did you learn to dance? You dance so well." My mother taught me," replied Igor, still distracted. Dancing with Zoe made him feel less conspicuous and more secure. Plus, he could freely follow Lord William without arousing suspicion. "Have you danced with many girls?" Igor grunted, hardly registering her words. He saw Lord William heading up for a side door and dropped Zoe's hand. "I'll be right back," he said, and hurried across the room, praying the attaché was only going to the bathroom. By the fourth waltz without him, Zoe was worried. She felt the rush of relief when he reappeared and cut in on the elderly Chinese man who had claimed her. "Where have you been?" she asked. "Oh, I think all this rich food doesn't agree with me. My stomach is upset and my head hurts. I think I need some fresh air. Do you mind if we leave now?" With step 2 complete, he didn't want to jeopardize his plan by staying any longer. She followed him to the door without protest. All she wanted was for him to be happy. Igor sat inside the marble boat at the summer palace, anxiously drumming his fingers. Though quiet on a winter morning, the park was a popular spot, and he'd already been there nearly half an hour. Now 2:10, according to his watch. Lord William's assistant, Jack, was 10 minutes late for their second meeting. He tried to imagine only positive outcomes. An agreement to his carefully calculated plot. The thrill of being smuggled out of China. His arrival in Britain. He stuffed a cigarette into his mouth, puffing hard and chewing on the butt until it sagged between his lips. Waiting. Endless waiting. He stared at his watch again. The second hand moved relentlessly forward, ever agonizing. Tick, 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 in time with the pounding of his heart. Unable to sit any longer, he stood and started pacing, nervousness and regret taking over his thoughts in equal measure. Maybe this was a trap, a KGB game. Maybe Lord William was a Russian spy planted inside the British government. As more minutes dragged by, he became more and more certain that Lord William had sold him out. Giving up hope, he angled his pacing toward the door. As he was about to step out the boat, Jack walked in. Relieved, Igor shook his hand and directed him to a corner table. Settling in his seat, Jack looked straight at Igor. "We don't think you've told us everything you know yet, so at this point, we can't help you." "What?" Igor felt first despair, then anger. He was sure his privileged technological information concerning both Chinese and Russian nuclear weapons was sufficient. Wouldn't Britain want access to all that? "I've told you everything. I'm here to help the Chinese to build nuclear bombs, but it will take them a minimum of 10 years to get the first bomb made, because Russia doesn't really trust the Chinese. For the last couple of years, both the material and personnel support we committed have been very basic and limited. That's all. What else do you need to know?" Jack let him talk without any interruption. He leaned back in the bench, assessing the truthfulness and reliability of Igor's account. Unlike many of the scientific types he dealt with, Igor's thinking seemed to be more related to societal concerns, and he sometimes sounded evasive or even a bit too practiced and slick. Although he was clearly depressed and discontented, Igor had not lost his reason, and Jack wasn't ready to trust him. He eyed Igor warily. "We want more information about sapwood." Igor's face fell. The world's first intercontinental ballistic missile, sapwood was designed by the Russians in 1953. Since then, they had closely guarded its secrets. Only a few selected people knew any details about the program. Western allies feared that Russian military superiority was increasing as the communists continued to expand their territory. He wasn't surprised that Jack wanted to know more, but Igor had already exaggerated his involvement the last time they met. "I told you I was only involved in sapwood for about a year. I don't know the current situation." "Why would your government pull you out that program and send you to China for a less important mission?" "How would I know? Nobody in Russian research, especially nuclear, knows why they are assigned anywhere, or what will happen tomorrow." Igor shrugged. "Are you already on the KGB's watch list? Maybe that's why they pulled you out, to keep you away from sapwood." Igor shrugged again, impatient with this useless line of questioning. "Who isn't on their list? Not even a fly can escape them," he said bitterly, and to illustrate his point, slapped his hand down on a fly that had just landed on the table between them. But as soon as he lifted his hand, the fly buzzed away, unharmed. He shook his head slowly, unable to think of anything to say and frustrated at Jack's cool nonchalance. "Get yourself transferred back to Russia and dig up some useful materials on sapwood. Then we'll talk about getting you out." "And just how am I supposed to do that? You know, scientists have no say in the projects they're assigned to, in Russia or China." Now it was Jack's turn to shrug. "That's your problem, not mine. This is urgent. We need information about sapwood because the existence of ICBMs affect NATO, and by extension, the entire Western free world defense capability. Once you have something for us, we will get you out." His voice was as cold and hard as his words. China would become a nuclear nation, he knew, but not in the immediate future, and that meant the immediate danger was still Soviet Russia. Against the harsh reality of Jack's indifference, Igor felt himself sinking into misery. He stared at the empty lake. Reflecting the bright sunlight, the thick ice looked like a sea of glittering stars, as remote and unreachable as his dreams of freedom. He turned his head away, desperate to find a way out, the determination slowly swelling again in his chest. He wasn't ready to accept defeat yet. Yeah, not much of a bargain for me. Are you sure I will accept? I'm confident you will, if you still want to get to the West. But how can I trust you? You have no idea what it's like to live in Russia. Igor shook his head resentfully. Perhaps I do, said Jack, smiling. He reached down and pushed a black leather bag across the space between them. Igor felt it nudge against his foot and flinched at its touch, but he suppressed the urge to look inside. This will help you build a network in Russia and make your life a little easier. And there's more where it came from. When you're back in Russia, we'll provide regular logistic and financial support. Igor sneered. You think you could buy me? Just like that? This isn't meant to buy your cooperation. It's earnest money. A down payment on your future assistance. We know the conditions in Russia are harsh and dangerous, but I assure you, you'll be well paid and well protected. As soon as you provide us with vital information, we will get you out. It was perfectly clear to Igor that all this planning had been futile. The stubborn Englishman had no intention of helping him escape, at least not now. He sighed, considering his options. He could refuse and go back to number 221 plant with no hope, or he could accept Jack's vague promises of future help. At least he could have the money here and now in his hand. He set the bag on the table and pulled it open, eyes widening as he peered in. He looked at Jack, impressed. So what do you want me to do? Nothing. Just act normal. As soon as you're back in Russia, our people will contact you. Your code name is Black Bear, said Jack, flashing a triumphant smile. Goodbye now, my friend, and good luck. Igor wandered aimlessly in the summer palace for hours, the black bag clutched in his fist, until he heard the call that the park was closing. By the time he got back to his hotel room, it was already dark. He threw himself on the bed, exhaustion and a feeling of doom overwhelming him, and wept with frustration. Surely no one has ever been as unlucky as I am. The sharp ring of the telephone woke him up. He rolled on his back and stared into the darkness. Who cares now, he thought. Russian or British, you can all go to hell. But the ringing persisted. Whoever was calling wouldn't give up. Who the hell is calling so late? He glanced at his watch. Nearly 8 o'clock. Then he sat up abruptly, guilt sweeping over him as he remembered his date with Zoe. For the last several days, he'd made excuses to avoid going out with her, in case Lord William had to change their arrangement. He wanted to keep Zoe out of his plan, at least at this stage, but he had agreed to meet her for dinner tonight. It must be her. Just as he reached for the phone, it stopped ringing, leaving an echoing silence in the room. He stood up and crossed to the window, looking down over the Chinese capital. Chang'an Avenue was deserted now, and in the empty darkness the city looked old and ailing, bereft of life and hope. This trip has turned into a total disaster, he said into the darkness. You have no choice but to go back to Russia now. Otherwise, Lord William, or even Jack, could blackmail me. He stood silent for a few minutes, musing. Then his shoulders straightened as he came to a decision. He would go back to his research at number 221 plant and wait to return to Russia. For the time being, he would keep up his relationship with Zoe, but he would not speak of marriage, because he could not imagine a brainwashed patriotist like her ever wanting to leave her motherland.